All right. Good evening, everybody. Yeah. So, I'd like to welcome everyone to AppNexus and the March for Innovation. As Congress takes up this reform bill, hundreds of thousands of leaders from politics, business, tech, media, sports, and entertainment, in addition to hundreds of thousands of Americans around the country, are participating in the largest ever virtual march on Washington to support bipartisan immigration reform legislation. We are excited to be behind it. It's a great demonstration of the entrepreneurial spirit that is part of our company's culture, New York's future, and the American dream. We at AppNexus intend to do whatever we can to preserve it. I'm also proud of those taking a leadership role in this fight and look forward to joining Mayor Bloomberg, Steve Case, Ron Conway, Brad Feld, Fred Wilson, Mike Maples, and thousands of others as we march to support comprehensive reform. Join me now in welcoming Jeremy Robbins. Jeremy works for Mayor Bloomberg and is the director of the Partnership for a New American Economy, a nationwide bipartisan group of more than 500 mayors and CEOs making the economic case for immigration reform. The partnership launched 3 years ago and includes co-chairs ranging from Mayor Bloomberg to Rupert Murdoch to Steve Ballmer. The organization has been active on the Hill and online, urging senators to pass smart, comprehensive immigration reform and educating the public on the positive economic impact of immigrants. Today, the partnership kicked off the March for Innovation with conversations around the country. Here's Jeremy Robbins to tell you more. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you all for coming today. Thank you for those of you streaming it online. Thank you for joining us in the March for Innovation. What we set out to do today was to create a digital storm online. We wanted to energize people all around the country to take to Twitter, to take to Facebook, to call on Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform. The Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill came out of the committee just last night. This is when the Senate's starting to focus on it. This is the time for people to stand up and to get active, and people did that today. We had so many people participate in our queuing up their Twitter and Facebook calls to action, our thunderclap, that we were the biggest political thunderclap of all time today. We had, that's thanks to everyone here. We had everyone from Grover Norquist and Jeb Bush and Condoleezza Rice and Arnold Schwarzenegger on the right. We had Cory Booker and Rahm Emanuel and Mayor Menino and groups all from the left and everyone in between. Tomorrow we have Russell Simmons. We have Mark Cuban is participating. We have people from all walks of life stepping up and saying we need to have immigration reform. And we're taking to every social media platform we can. We've had Reddit AMAs. We've had Facebook Q&As. We've had Twitter town halls. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid did his first ever video Vine for this. We're trying to break new ground and show that we can use social media, that we can use technology and innovation as another tool to help move political movements and to pass legislation. So we're delighted to partner with AppNexus on this. We're delighted to partner with Alexis and Jalak and Fred Wilson. It's been a phenomenal day. We've been all over the web, and we're just getting started. Our kickoff march is going to start this morning at 8:30 a.m. It's going to go until tomorrow evening. And so this is a time to stand up. This is a time to get active. For those of you who haven't marched yet, you have a mobile device right in front of you. I'm sure you do. Go to marchforinnovation.com, click away, and make your voice heard. So we're just getting started. This is going to be a long process. The bill is going to be on the Senate floor next month. Then we're going to go to the House, and we are, by standing up and by joining with advocates around the country, we are going to help pass historic comprehensive immigration reform that's been 48 years in the making. And to tell you why that's so important, we have a great panel today. So we're going to start with Brian O'Kelly is going to have a fireside chat with Fred Wilson. Fred Wilson in this crowd, I'm sure, needs no introduction, but he's at Union Square Ventures and is one of the leading venture capitalists in the country and in the world, and is an absolute expert on what we need to innovate and bring new businesses to New York into this economy. So thank you all for coming and enjoy the program.
All right, come on up, Fred. So apparently it's a New York City fire code violation to have an actual fire, so we'll have to imagine it.
We could have like one of those iPad fires.
Yeah, it's a good idea. We'll work on that. That's innovation happening right in front of you. So what I'd love to talk about tonight is, first of all, what this immigration reform proposal actually means, both for everyone, but also on a personal level, what it means for us, both as human beings, New Yorkers, and as members of the entrepreneurial community.
Well, for me, there's a social justice component to it, and then there's or fairness and equity, and then there's an economic and innovation angle to it. The social justice and equity angle is just that, forever this country has let immigrants in, right? This country's been built by immigrants, and to me, the idea that we're going to just, at some point in the development of our country, say, we're done, no more immigrants, seems nuts. And it kind of feels like the country, in reaction to 9/11 and some of the economic challenges that we're having now, there's a growing chorus in our country that we can't let anybody else in. And so on that level, I want to see us make a strong statement that we're a nation of immigrants and we're always going to be a nation of immigrants. But then on the economic and innovation side, I mean, the statistics are just, undeniable that more startups are started by immigrants, more innovation in this country has come from immigrants, and it makes sense, right? Because there's bright people all around the world, but many of them are trapped in societies and cultures where they can't innovate and they can't be creative, and they come to America and all of a sudden they can, and just amazing things happen. And we feel it and you feel it, I'm sure, in your business, that when we can't hire the best and brightest people because we can't get them visas or we can't literally even get them into this country, it stunts the growth of our companies and it stunts the growth of our country. And that, I think, is a really big problem.
I agree. And I have some stats here just because you mentioned this. And more than 40% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. 28% of all companies started in the U.S. in 2011 had immigrant founders. These are pretty enormous numbers. 76% of patents that the top 10 U.S. patent-producing universities, so Caltech, MIT, Stanford, and so forth, 76% of the patents had an immigrant inventor. So this is a huge source of innovation. From your perspective, though, if you look at this actual reform process, how does it help startups? How does it help the entrepreneurial community?
Well, there's a bunch of proposals in the bill specifically that are going to help tech companies and startups. There's an increase in the number of H-1B visas, which is probably the dominant visa that tech companies have used over the years to bring talented people to the United States. There's also a concept of an entrepreneurial visa or a startup visa, whatever you want to call it. If you're an entrepreneur, you come to the States, you start a company, you raise some capital, they can't kick you out. And I mean, that just seems like obvious, right? But yet today, that's not how it works. There's the concept of the STEM visa, where if you come to this country and you get a graduate degree or an advanced degree in science, technology, engineering, and math, you get a visa. You get to stay in this country. And so those are the kinds of things that the tech industry has been asking for years. And the interesting thing about those ideas is that nobody is opposed to those ideas, right? The Republicans, the Democrats, the liberals, the conservatives, nobody is opposed to those ideas. But the reason that they haven't happened is they've been hostage to this notion of comprehensive immigration reform. Everybody who wants immigration reform on both sides, because immigration reform means not just letting more people in. It also means hardening the borders and a bunch of other things. So there's this huge desire to have immigration reform on both sides, and they basically have not allowed any piecemeal immigration reform to happen because they want everybody focused on getting the big bill done. Now, that's annoying. It pissed me off when I figured that out about 5 years ago, but now I sort of made peace with it, and that's just how it is in this country. And so whether you're a fan of comprehensive immigration reform, as I am, or not, if you want to see the kind of immigration reform that the innovation sector needs, then we got to go for the whole ball of wax.
And given we got past the Judiciary Committee last night, it feels like this is on the way to happen.
Well, from what I have been told, and I'm not a Washington insider, but I do talk to a lot of people about this. the politics have finally aligned on this issue, largely because of the drubbing that the Republicans got in the presidential election and the lack of support among the parts of the population that are most interested in immigration reform. The Republican Party has decided that they need immigration reform as much as anybody, and they need to be a champion of immigration reform, and that they've been on the wrong side of this issue. So the politics have aligned. It doesn't mean that this is a slam dunk, because there's lots of special interests and there's lots of stuff that's going to get hammered out, and there are people who are going to have to make some unpopular votes, and so all of that has to happen, and that's why all of us have to be out there, pushing, evangelizing, not just in the social media realm, but with our friends and with anybody who will listen, that this is a good thing.
Yeah, and for all of you in the audience, if you go to the March for Innovation website, if you type in the state you're from, most of us New York, it will let you actually tweet to your senators, it will let you email your senators, and even give you a link to call your senator, so you can actually get in touch and say, please support this legislation. So I'd really encourage all of you to do that as part of this process. Some people have asked, what is a virtual march? It's when a lot of people do that all at the same time, and it really does send a message that we care, and that this will impact all of us on multiple levels.
The thing that's cool about social media is it can light up the entire country in a way that we probably can't. I mean, the most important places for us to reach out to our elected officials are not necessarily New York and California and Boston and the places that the tech industry is really centered, but it's other parts of the country where people are hurting economically, and the idea that more workers are going to come in and compete with them with jobs is a very, very unpopular idea. And to get those elected officials to understand that there are two sides of this issue, and that they have constituents who are on the innovation side of this issue is important. So what's cool about social media is that people all over the country will see these hashtags and these Facebook updates and all that, and so our activity will light up other parts of the country where the outreach to the elected officials is even more important. I'm not saying don't reach out to your elected officials here in New York, you should, but the outreach to the elected officials in parts of the country where this is a more unpopular concept is also really important.
Absolutely. Let's talk for a second about the social justice side of this, because for me that's almost as important as the innovation piece, because I feel like there are pretty critical issues there. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the big ones is the kids, right? So you can argue that parents who came across the border illegally, maybe don't necessarily deserve to be here, but they're kids who didn't make that decision, were brought by the parents, were raised in this country, went to school in this country, have friends in this country. And I have a number of personal situations that look like that, and that's a place where that's where the DREAM Act is all about, right? And I don't even know if we're calling that the DREAM Act anymore. Maybe it's. I actually don't even know if that's part of this bill or not.
I tried to figure it out yesterday, and I couldn't figure it out.
Right.
But that's
so
politics, right?
Maybe Jeremy knows. Is it part of this bill? Yes. It is. All right. Yes. Okay. The DREAM Act's part of this bill. Great. But that to me is a big one, right? These are kids who just throwing them out of the country, is to my mind a really bad idea.
In the screwed up version, I have a family that we're close to that the parents did immigrate illegally, but then got green cards. All of their kids who were under the age of 18 also were then qualified, but they have one daughter who's 20 and was not qualified. So they have one person in this family who can't qualify, and so she's effectively illegal, though the rest of her family isn't. If they take a family trip, she basically has to drive or do something else. She's well-educated, she's in nursing school, and yet she's illegal. And so to me, this is the kind of stories where you see families that are either ripped asunder or are at the risk of that all the time because of these policies. And we see the same thing with same-sex couples, which is something that's very important to us at AppNexus and to me personally, is that there are many cases where a same-sex spouse can't sponsor a married partner for a green card. And so you have cases where a spouse may be deported because of being in a same-sex relationship.
Well, the other problem with the illegal workers is that they live in in an underground economy, right? They're not, fully functioning members of our society, and I think we as a country lose out on that because we don't necessarily, capture that economic activity in the way that we would of a fully functioning member of our society. And so, I'm not saying we should just open our borders and let anybody come in, and there are, homeland security issues that I think are serious, and there are also a need to make sure that, the people who are coming to this country are, good people who are going to work hard and are going to pay their taxes and, do all the other things that we expect people to do in this country. So I think there's a balance, and hopefully this, I haven't read every line in the bill, but I do believe that, this has been something that has been highly negotiated and strikes the right balance.
So for other investors and entrepreneurs in the community, so we're here, which is a very important start.
Right.
What else do we want people to do to support this, maybe during and after this march?
Well, I think, being a knowledgeable proponent of sensible immigration reform means understanding the issues. Obviously, you and I have a little bit of work to do on that because we didn't know that the DREAM Act was part of this, but we should all know what's in the bill. We should know what the key points are. We should be able to talk about it at a bar with our friends or a cocktail party or a dinner party or whatever. And I'm not saying that we should become like, ridiculous, crazy about it, but I think we should become proponents of this and talk to people about it and make it an issue that everybody's talking about in this country. It's that we should have a national conversation about this, and that each and every one of us should be part of that national conversation. And that President Obama said something, I think accidentally, maybe 3 months ago, about some specific piece of legislation. But I think it really speaks volumes about him, and also I think about all politicians. And he said that in order for politicians to support something, they need the country to want it to happen, right? So what that really means is that our leaders don't lead, they follow us. And so if we as a country signal by our interest in the bill and our knowledge of the bill and our passion for the topic that we want this to happen, it'll happen. It's the same thing with same-sex marriage, right? Look at how much has happened in that topic in 3 years, 5 years. It's incredible, right? The whole country has basically just said, enough of this, right? And now all of a sudden, all the laws are changing.
We hope.
Well, I think it's happening. But anyway, this is not a conversation about that.
We'll see what the Supreme Court says. But I think that's right. And I think that that's democracy in action.
Right.
And what's exciting is that, I don't know about all of you, but I've always felt like in New York, what does my vote matter? We're probably going to elect a Democratic president and a Republican mayor. That seems how it works. But here's a case where I think on social media we all have influence far beyond one vote.
Right.
And that's actually exciting if you think about it, that we all have so much more influence than our single vote in the system might represent. And so every time we tweet, I know many of us posted articles on Mashable this morning.
Right.
And it was exciting because I saw my article, my little personal story being picked up all around the world. And we're basically saying not just to our politicians that this matters, but we're saying to potential immigrants, potential entrepreneurs, potential innovators all around the world, that the New York tech community and that the United States as a country really is open. Between 1870 and 1900, the population of the US basically doubled because of immigration. It's crazy. It was like, I'll get these stats slightly wrong, but something like there were 30 million people in the US in 1870, and we had 30 million immigrants in the next 30 years. It was just insane. You can just imagine the boat streaming past the Statue of Liberty. I don't know if it was even there yet, but what would have been the Statue of Liberty if it wasn't? We'll work on our history too.
We need to work on our history too.
We got some work to do. But my point is just to say that this is a country that is known by the world to be a country that is an immigrant nation, is a melting pot. And I think that's why this is the issue where we can tell the politicians where they should follow. At least from my perspective.
Well, and I think we can do more than just social media. I think that we can, in our companies that we work in, we can tell the leaders of our companies that this is a big issue. Obviously, you already are there, and I suspect probably the CEOs of every tech company I know are probably already there. But if they hear from their teams and their companies that they really care about this issue, it might encourage them to do a little bit more, like you're doing, to take a little bit more leadership. And I will tell you one thing, when a CEO of any company, and it doesn't have to be a Fortune 500 company, when the CEO of any company calls a congressman or a senator and says, I'm the CEO of XYZ company, we're in your, in your district or whatever, and I need to talk to you about something, they get to talk to that person, right? And so I do think that we can all encourage the leaders of our companies and the leaders of our other institutions that we're part of to care about this issue. That's another way. I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on social media, because in some ways social media is the most, it's the most liquid, the most friction-free medium that we have, and we should absolutely be using it. But I do think there's other places that we can go to be advocates for this issue as well.
Such as?
Well, I talked about one, working inside of our
Sure.
companies and institutions. I also think that, talking to people who are in the local, your city council people like that, this is not a local issue, this is a federal issue, but I do think that getting people in all parts of public life and the world of government, to understand how important this issue will have ancillary benefits, because people people in politics talk to people in politics, and the more that the politicians feel that the time has come for this issue, the better.
One interesting corollary for that is that you could argue that Mayor Bloomberg is one of the most powerful politicians on the national stage.
Right.
So New York, as a nation in of itself, would be pretty meaningful economically. So many of the Fortune 500 companies are headquartered here. We really punch out of our weight class as a city, which I think all of you know. One interesting point for us as New Yorkers is that this immigration reform process probably benefits New York more than almost any part of the country. We have historically been, the face of America for the world, and for entrepreneurs here, I feel like we have a huge advantage because we can recruit from so many of the universities. We pull in so much talent. AppNexus would not exist without immigrants.
Right.
My co-founder, Mike Nolet, is Dutch, refuses to switch to a US citizenship. Until recently, he became American. I'm very proud of converting him, and then he moved back to London. Doesn't make any sense. And Michael Rubenstein, our president, is a Canadian who also refuses to convert. I do think we may have to make exceptions in the Reform Act for Canadians. But that's a different conversation. But just to put that in this way, that of the 3 leaders of AppNexus, 2 are immigrants. And I don't know about your portfolio, but my sense is that that is unusual, but not incredibly unusual for companies here in New York.
We have about 50, 55 portfolio companies at Union Square Ventures, and I would guess that the founders or co-founders of at least half the companies are immigrants. And we have a number of situations that have happened in our portfolio where founders, even CEOs, have been kicked out of this country. And that was one of the things that really got me more fired up about this issue. When somebody comes to this country, starts a company, hires a bunch of people, raises a bunch of money, builds a product, gets customers using it, and then literally has to get on a plane and leave because they're no longer allowed to be in this country. And then in one case, it took 6 months to get them back into the country. That's hugely disruptive to the business. I mean, think about it.
Well, and not just the founders, their families.
Right.
So there are also cases where, a family is split up over these issues.
Right.
Where, the husband or wife has, or husband and husband, one of them has an immigration issue and they have to actually rearrange their lives, potentially leaving because of a family issue. So it's actually really important not to look just at the founder in those cases, and we've seen that happen at AppNexus and other places.
The other thing that strikes me, I write a blog and I have a global audience. Interestingly enough, it never ceases to amaze me that there are people in parts of the world that I've never been to who are reading it every day. But whenever I write about this issue, the thing that becomes very clear to me is that there are a lot of people who are interested in technology, who are working in technology, who are interested in startups, that would come to this country for sure to work for a startup or even do a startup, and they don't know how to get here. And every time I write about immigration, I get tons of comments from these people saying, I hope you fix this because it's my dream to come to the United States and work for a startup or work in technology or be a founder of a technology company. So there is a magnet, right? There's a magnet right here in the United States for talent. And what we've done is we've created some sort of electronic force field around the magnet that makes the magnet not work. It's nuts.
At Right Media, my previous company, our very first ad campaign was for green cards. These ads would run all around the world, and they had amazing click rates. If you say, hey, you can get a green card, people in every country will click. I think we served about 1 trillion of those ads around the world. And there were entire businesses built just on...
People want to get green cards.
Just that. I mean, it tells you something. If the most compelling online advertisement of all time is come to the US with a green card. I'm not sure that's a woohoo, but yes. So there's no question. They want to come. We want them here as entrepreneurs and investors. And I think what we're all here for today is to encourage our government and our politicians to let that happen. So with that, please go to marchforinnovation.com, join the Thunderclap. Please start these conversations inside your companies, inside your communities, on social media. And with that, thank you so much, Fred.
Thanks,
Really
Brian.
appreciate your
Great.
support.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Brian. That was fantastic, and a very clear picture of why we need to participate in the march and why we need to push for immigration reform. And before turning it over to the second panel, I wanted to give a quick bit of background on the march itself and how we started. And it started as an idea of how do we leverage all of the assets we have to push for immigration reform. Everything we're doing at the Partnership for a New American Economy gears on how do we move the votes and pass a bill. So we're organizing in states, we're working with universities, we're lobbying, we're working with academics to produce the research. But social media was an untapped resource, and we're trying to do something that was new, that was building on the back of campaigns that I know Alexis and others helped lead, like SOPA, PIPA, the Stop Online Privacy Act. But we were trying to do something new, and we didn't know how to do it. When we were starting, there weren't a whole lot of people who were willing to jump in. But Fred Wilson was willing to jump in, and Nithya Das from AppNexus was willing to jump in. And from the very beginning, Nithya who's the Associate General Counsel here at AppNexus, was one of our biggest leaders. She's the reason that we're here today in this space. And when today we wanted to put our voice out around, when we worked with leaders to get them speaking, we worked with Brian to put his great piece in Mashable, and we worked with Nithya Das, who has a wonderful piece today in the Huffington Post, and I encourage you all to read it. And she was the brains and some of the inspiration behind doing this event, and this led to events around the country. So right when we go offline in a few minutes after this next panel, we're going to turn this over to Austin, Texas. And when they're done, we're going to turn it over to San Antonio. And when they're done, we're going to turn it over to San Francisco. And when they're done, we're going to turn it over to incubators all around the country. That this is a movement we're growing all around the country, and it started here, and it started in large part because of Nithya. And so it is my pleasure to bring her on stage to walk us through the next panel. So thank you all again.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to welcome Jalak Jobanputra and Alexis Ohanian to the stage with me. So we thought that we would shift gears just a little bit. Brian and Fred just spent a little bit talking about specifically about immigration from a technology point of view, and we're going to be focusing a little bit on that, but also just wanted to share some personal stories with you of why, I think each of us probably has our own personal story of why we're here and supporting immigration reform. With that, I'll just quickly introduce Jalak is currently the managing partner at FuturePerfect Ventures. She's a venture capitalist with over 20 years experience in technology, and she actually spearheaded the formation of NYC Seed in 2008. She's involved in entrepreneurship initiatives on a global basis, including with Techstars and Ty, the Indus entrepreneur. She's also been heavily involved in launching and kicking off the March for Innovation from the very onset. And Alexis is, he asked me to describe him as a startup guy. He's well known for more than just being a startup guy, but well known for being the co-founder of Reddit, a social news website that was bought by Condé Nast in 2006. He's also a founder behind. He's also involved with Hipmunk and Breadpig, and is a Y Combinator ambassador. So to get into the sort of personal motivation, I thought I would share this morning. Actually, I was on my way into the office, and I had just dropped my daughter off at school at Chelsea and was headed in for a meeting, thinking about all the things that I needed to do today. I was thinking about this event, and I sort of stopped and wondered. And my parents came here from India. My dad came here on a student visa, and was able to get sponsored by his brother a few years after that. And I found myself wondering, what would my life be like today if my father had not been able to stay in the U.S. and bring my mom here and really build our life? I certainly wouldn't be sitting here. I would have been raised in a small village somewhere in South India, and I think my life would have definitely taken a different turn. And so I think when you start thinking about these issues through those lenses of who are the faces here, or the people that are contributing to our community, that's really what motivates me. I'm curious to hear each of your stories.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Chivalry's not dead, huh? So my story started, I was actually born in Nairobi in Kenya. My grandparents had emigrated to Tanzania, both sets of grandparents. My parents grew up in different parts of Tanzania and actually met in medical school in India. Moved back to Uganda after medical school, and they were there in the beginning of the Idi Amin regime. Left Uganda, thankfully, safely, and ended up in Nairobi, where my brother and I were both born. And in the late 60s and early 70s, the U.S. was welcoming quite a few professionals and physicians into the U.S., and that's how they came over here. Moved to a very small town in rural New Jersey, where we were the only minorities, the only immigrants in that town, in the school system. My brother and I did not speak English when we moved over to the U.S., and it was a mutual education process. And when Fred was talking about the social justice angle, there's also the element of what immigrants are giving back, other than just business, but in terms of culturally and in creating social fabric in this country that is really not replicated anywhere else in the world. And I just saw an old friend from high school who mentioned to me that it was the first time he had heard a foreign language spoken, and then he started doing all this research on India and other countries, and so I think there's that important element that I worry with all the rhetoric and isolationist rhetoric, especially that's out there now, that we're not looking at what immigrants and the immigration history of this country has really added to everyone's lives.
Well, I was made here in New York in Fort Greene. Can I get? Is there any Brooklyn representing here? All right. Well, I tell you, I live where I live. And also, let me just send a message to all the other white people out there who might be worried. It's gonna be okay. All right. Really. Because if you look back, they said this about every single immigration movement. Everything was going to destroy the country, but lo and behold, it only made us stronger. But I live in Brooklyn, and where I live, I have chosen to live specifically because every morning I see the largest undocumented immigrant outside of my window, a French lady, the Statue of Liberty, who symbolizes, we've already heard it once before, I hope we hear it lots more times, which symbolizes everything that is so right with America, and it also symbolizes how I ended up here. Now, my father's side immigrated here, fleeing the Armenian genocide, but that was a few generations ago. My mom actually was fresh off the boat in 1977. She came from Germany. This was not one of those stories where she was fleeing anything. She just came for love to be with my father. Problem was, when they shacked up together here in New York, her visa expired. And so my mother was actually an undocumented illegal immigrant for about a year in New York, before my dad married her and she got a green card and she became a citizen, a very good US citizen, in fact. And to that point, one, if any of you use Reddit, we had about 70 million people last month, I want you all to know that if she had been deported Steve Huffman, my co-founder, probably would have gone on to continue to be a programmer in Virginia, and there wouldn't be a Reddit. So if that's any reason to support this, there's one. But the other, and the one that means so much to me, and the one that I encourage all of my friends who've never been a part of it to do, those of us who were lucky enough to be born in great places like Brooklyn, New York, or anywhere in the US, to go to a swearing-in ceremony. If you have never been to one and you have no idea of how much it means to be an American citizen, go to one and watch these people, these Americans, take the Pledge of Allegiance for the first time. And if you have ever seen, these are the moments that make you appreciate the things you can't possibly appreciate, because you see the emotion, you see the passion with which people take the pledge for the first time. And if that doesn't convince you that it's a good thing, I don't know what will. But I see it so many times in founders who are going to create jobs in this country who I still have to write recommendation letters for, even though they're Canadian citizens who just want to start companies with venture money they raised. Here, it's frustrating. But we've made so much progress, and I'm so optimistic after that committee vote, and it's just going to be a lot more momentum going forward. So, let's keep pushing this ball onward, right?
So Alexis, you sort of alluded to this, but there are people who will say, well, we have American-born individuals who are here and they don't have jobs. Maybe they don't have, the sort of premier access to education. Why are you supporting immigration reform? I'm curious to hear what your response to those opponents would be.
This country, the system that we believe in, is one that is based on competition. And we need to be doing everything we can to help Americans who were born here compete, not just with other Americans, but with the world. And so we have all kinds of great advancements coming up in technology. There have been so many improvements in ed tech, in the sector of the economy that's trying to help people get the jobs for today. But the reality is, every single portfolio company I have, every CEO I know can't hire enough developers and designers. And so while at the same time, we can do this in parallel, while at the same time we train the workforce we have, why not infuse it with all the talent that can't even get here to create the jobs that we need to hire more Americans?
Or the ones that we're training here. There's so many folks that are going to school here at all levels, at PhD levels, undergrad, grad levels, that want to stay, want to start their businesses here. And I know many who've had to return to their home countries have started successful businesses elsewhere and are creating jobs elsewhere and helping the economies elsewhere compete with the United States. So it's a very real issue. And I agree with Alexis. This immigration in itself is not a panacea for our economic problems right now. Education education reform is absolutely necessary. Getting more STEM and science education into early schools, early on in the schools is very important also. But immigration reform, I strongly believe, is an absolute essential part of the equation.
Yeah, I agree, and I would just add the other piece for me that I think because, for example, for me, because my parents were allowed to stay here and become citizens, my story, my children's story, becomes a part of America's success rather than allowing these forcing these individuals basically to go back to their home country and then build companies there that we could keep here.
And the world is just getting more competitive. I travel around the world speaking to governments and talking about the innovation ecosystems we've built here. I was investing out in Silicon Valley for a number of years before coming to New York, and they're learning quickly. I mean, Chile has certainly provides a lot of incentives. Canada just implemented a startup visa, so they're kind of taking advantage of our inaction here in the U.S.
Actually, I know that you mentioned that you've met with individuals, I think you said in Indonesia and other countries. What is their response to the immigration efforts here and the conversation that's going on here?
Well, and again, this is something that Fred mentioned. Despite the fact that there are more and more opportunities in countries around the world, I still think the U.S. is a huge magnet. we have a history here of freedom, and even with a fairly dysfunctional government right now, we're still able to get things done. And people who come from countries where they don't have those opportunities, or they can't rely on their politicians, really look to the U.S. So I still think we can attract a lot of talent, and it's going to take a while for some of these other, Indonesia certainly has their own political issues and problems, and so people still view the U.S. as probably one of the most stable countries, or the most stable country in the world.
So I know that as leaders in the tech industry, and particularly with your sort of investor hats on, you both have seen firsthand a number of stories from entrepreneurs who haven't been able to to get immigration status here. Can you maybe share some of those stories with us?
One of the first recommendation letters that I wrote for a YC company had a Russian co-founder. And when I first was approached by it, I was like, of course, I would love to. That'd be great. And I'm writing this thing out, and I'm like, well, there was that Cold War going on for a while. Like, I could see how they probably want to go through a little extra process just to vet. Maybe that's why I have to do this. And then I was doing it for a citizen of Great Britain, for an English lad, and I'm like, that's weird. Like, I thought we had a pretty good relationship. Like, it seems like they're really putting him through a lot of work just to start a company in America and hire Americans. But then my most recent one was with a company called Couple, which these are all companies that have gone through Y Combinator. They've been vetted. They've raised significant seed rounds. And it's a bunch of Canadians who had to go back to Canada and wait until the whole thing could reset and they could come back. And it's frustrating because, again, these are companies that are ready to, and are in many cases already hiring Americans to do great jobs with great salaries, with great benefits that are having a material impact on this economy. And it's that frustrating. I still believe this is the best country in the world, and the best country in the world to start a company. But damn, we're just making it really hard on ourselves to stay number one. And that it is unfortunately, I don't know how sustainable that can be. But like I said, we've made some great progress and already, in what has been a decades-long fight for some substantial reform, and I think we're making some headway.
Do you know what ended up happening with the Russian-born entrepreneur?
So the Russian one, no visa. It took another year, maybe year and a half, and in the meantime, he was hanging out back in Moscow, working remotely, and it's infuriating. And every investor has that story, like you were saying earlier, of the founder who simply gave up and said, I'm going back. She says, I'm going to go back and I'm going to start my business. And they're the one that you're like, yeah, the one that got away because, now it's employing hundreds of people in another country.
Yeah, and I know the New York City Economic Development Corporation a few years ago ran an international business plan competition where they brought over the winners to New York and met with Mayor Bloomberg and some great companies. I mean, I think there were several hundred applications for that competition, and none of those founders could get visas to stay here, and then they had investors ready to invest, and they were really some of the best and brightest, and we couldn't keep them. So I'm hoping that this bill will pass, and we won't have that issue anymore.
I'm curious, so in your sort of conversations and involvement in the March for Innovation, what are some of the conversations that you're hearing from the community in terms of other tech leaders? And could you talk a little bit about what you think the longer term impact on the tech and startup community, and maybe even the economy at large is if we don't achieve immigration reform?
Wow, I feel like we should have gotten David Karp to wear an iMarch T-shirt during his press event on Monday. I don't know. Obviously there's been a lot of interesting discussion around the forward.us movement. I know how important, and this is across the board, it is to every single CEO that I know within the tech community get this right. Frankly, I'd like to see more of them tweeting about it and talking about it and wearing iMarch T-shirts. If you guys had given me one, I would have rocked it on stage. Can we get some iMarch swag? But the point is, it is ostensibly such a bipartisan issue, because when it comes down to it, as Fred said earlier, this is about letting people stay in this country to create jobs and bring value and do all the great stuff that this country is known for. So this should keep up. Momentum really should keep up, because if it doesn't, then we're just back to where we were before, and we're sending more Canadians back home to start their companies across the border.
Yeah, I think traditionally the tech industry has not been very politically active. I think there are a lot of libertarians in the bunch, and we really need to make sure that the message gets out. We have a conversation. I think conversation, on this, the high-tech components of the bill are important, as are the other components of the bill, because there's a lot of misunderstandings of what the implications are, and the only way to address those is if we have conversations. So I'd like to see more folks in the tech industry really take an interest and start forums and have conversations and as Fred said, get educated on what's in there.
So I have this statistic here. It says, even if every American advanced degree STEM graduate gets a job, the U.S. will face 200,000 unfilled advanced degree STEM jobs by 2018. And for me, I mean, I think that sort of, that puts a pin on it, right? Because as a country, even assuming this, if we're not then able to keep up, I don't know how we end up competing on a global basis. Right,
and it's we need to bring the Americans that are here up to speed on and educate them and retrain them. But in the meantime, so we don't fall behind, we need to continue to let folks with the right skills who want to be here, who you probably saw this with your parents. I mean, my parents started over. My mom was unable to fulfill her career ambitions because they moved here. And there are huge sacrifices that these immigrants make. They're not here to get a free ride. They're here to contribute and build businesses and hire and make a better life. And because a lot of them left a pretty good life behind to be here. So I think we need to look at the work ethic that they bring and how it can help us not only maintain where we are, but stay the most competitive country in the world.
Yeah, no, I definitely saw that as well. I remember actually going back to India for the first time when I was, I think, 10 or 11, and meeting the person in the town who loaned my dad, the couple $100s to buy his plane ticket to come here. So he literally came here with, maybe a quarter and not sort of the proverbial dime in his pocket, but definitely starting over from scratch. So, one thing that was really great for me today as I was going about working, I had my browser window open, and I was on Twitter, and I was seeing all of these terrific tweets about the March for Innovation, the event tonight. There were a lot of folk, and Jeremy mentioned earlier that Barack Obama had retweeted somebody, but there were also a lot of tech leaders who were using Twitter to spread the message. And I'm curious, what do you think is the best way to really mobilize the community and make a call to action? Is it social media? Is there another? Is it in person? Like, what should we? Everybody here is obviously incentivized to help spread the word. That's why they're all here. But what else should we be doing?
I'd love to see my fellow tech CEOs, to your point earlier, start talking about the stuff, start getting political about the things that matter to them. I certainly saw Sopa Pippa was about as slam dunk as you could imagine, and yet I saw silence for months from most of my peers. I'm not going to name names, but then you could look at a bill like CISPA and see near total silence from most of my peers. I hope for an issue that, again, like this, seems so straightforward, so bipartisan, so obvious that we can see more of my tech CEO peers tweeting about it, or liking it, or Google Plussing it, which I don't use ironically. I'm a big fan. It's gonna win. I'm telling you, maybe. All right, maybe not. But the point is, there is something to be said, and I hate it whenever you hear someone deride slacktivism. Just slap them. Actually, don't. That's not nice. But the reason why they have I don't even know the reason why that's such malarkey is what has ultimately, now it's bad if that's where it ends, but it's an important starting point, because what social media has let us do is have the same honest conversations we would normally have in small rooms around dinner tables or at our church or with our bowling team, but at scale. Because the only way big change happens is if a bunch of people just kind of say, yeah, you know what? This is a thing I'm interested in. And maybe they had that conversation. I'm sure they had those conversations for decades, for generations, and it never left the water cooler, so to speak. It never left the dinner table because we didn't have a platform. And so even having the willingness to publicly like something or publicly retweet something that you care about actually does matter. It does have an impact. And it should not be where you end. You shouldn't smugly say, yes, I've done it, I'm finished. But it is absolutely not to be derided as pure slacktivism.
Yeah, and this is really our opportunity. I mean, if we don't pass this immigration reform now, who knows when the opportunity is going to arise again? And I think we need to infuse a sense of urgency that we all need to be active here, and there is bipartisan support. It's a kind of a perfect storm politically to make it happen right now. And let's kind of air the differences, answer the questions, but come out and support it.
Yeah, I have to say, it can always be challenging from the company perspective to determine when it's right to step in and take a stand. And that's actually been one of the really great things for me personally as an employee at AppNexus is the company's willingness to take a stand on issues that are really important to the employees here. We actually were supporters of an amicus brief in opposition to DOMA, obviously big supporters of the March for Innovation and Immigration Reform. And I will just say that Brian's favorite color is orange, as you may have noticed from our space here.
That's a good look.
So if you get him an orange iMarch T-shirt, I'm sure that he would more than gladly wear it. So with that, I thought that maybe we would save a little bit of time here for some Q&A if folks have questions. We do have microphones set up here in the aisle if anybody has a question they wanted to ask.
Hi. This question's for Alexis. I'm wondering, you mentioned that if your parents had not immigrated to the US, that Reddit would maybe not exist. Can you summarize what you think, what it is about America that made Reddit into the company that is today?
So specifically, my mother had immigrated here. It was my dad's family that had immigrated here. He was born in the States, but yeah, if my mom had been kicked out for being an illegal, they would have not made me. And in Fort Greene, which was Myrtle Ave, was very romantic in the early '80s. They would have not made me, and Steve Huffman, my Reddit co-founder, would have stayed. He had a great job lined up as a computer engineer in Virginia, and probably would have done that and lived a great life. I think it'd actually be kind of a fun experiment to look at all of those tech companies we cannot live without, and just identify the ones. I mean, I'm sure this list has been made. We know statistically there's a significant number of immigrant founders. But if you throw together immigrant founders along with like children of immigrant founders, imagine for a day if those sites all went dark and someone simply pointed out, well, if that hadn't been the product of a successful immigration, you wouldn't be enjoying, Google. You wouldn't be.
Well, Intel wouldn't be around.
And these are big deals. And it's just funny. I think there are you could point to lots of economic, lots of policy, lots of very rule-oriented reasons why the United States is a great place to start a business. But there's also that undeniable spirit. I don't think it's exceptionalism, because obviously plenty of these immigrants are bringing the spirit, but the entire system sort of aspires to be better, which is what I like about it. The fact that it is designed with the knowledge that it's not to be perfect and it is to be always improved upon. It sort of reminds me of releasing an early version of your site, knowing that you're going to consistently improve it. And that's what I want to see us striving toward. And I think that's why we, for now at least, are still the great country we are, albeit flawed.
All right. One of my political mentors says that one of the things that innovation does best is when it doesn't just do something online, but it has an impact offline as well. How do we take this iMarch to have an offline impact? How do we have people tweet, but then also make phone calls, post on Facebook, but also show up in person?
Yeah, well, the March for Innovation site has links where you can call and get the numbers for all your senators. I think when the vote does go to the House, it's going to be very important to put pressure on those that may oppose the bill and just get as many calls in. I've met with many congressmen over the last few months, and they all reiterate that those calls, tweets, Facebook posts, all of that makes an absolute difference. I don't think that one person's call will not make a difference. It will.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate what Brian said earlier, which is that if you go to marchforinnovation.com, you can type in your state and automatically tweet or email to your representative.
Hi. So my parents recently immigrated to the U.S. and like 2 years ago, and it's been really difficult for one of them in particular kind of to integrate into society. She didn't really speak English. She kind of still doesn't really speak English that well. I don't know if you guys, do you know, is there something within this that will help people once they actually, if they're lucky enough to come to the U.S., kind of give them the tools so that they can be a functioning part of society? Maybe you guys have had experience with this, given that your parents all immigrated to the U.S., because it's kind of difficult if you try to give them the tools, but it can become difficult.
And let me just, I think you'll have a great answer for this. I'm just going to point out that even if your mom still raises an awesome family and runs an awesome household, that's still a very worthy contribution to society.
Well, but she may not be fulfilled, and so she completely off of that. So yes, it is noble, but I agree. I think that integration is a big piece of it. And Jeremy, I don't know if there. I mean, I know there's some English learning component to some of the bill, but.
Big challenge when this bill is passed is now all of a sudden you have people who are going to be integrated in society, and how do you do that? How are we going to get lawyers to get them to get through the system? How are we going to get English classes so they learn English? How are we going to get skills training? And so there are groups in New York. The New York Immigration Coalition is a really good one that can orient you to services that you can get. There's a mayor's office of immigrant affairs that has great services at the high school then for people who are underskilled. There are groups like Upwardly Global that specialize in this, like getting people trained in whatever they're trained in so that they can work in those industries. But it is a huge, huge challenge. I don't want to underplay how difficult that's going to be.
I do think that one of the benefits of the immigration reform efforts, though, will be that it helps to, my hope is that it helps to strengthen the immigrant communities themselves because it allows them to really thrive here and build upon being here in sort of a safe manner. And so I think that will go a long way as well.
Yeah, and my parents did speak English when they moved here. I did not. It was easier for me because I was thrown into school and kind of learn very, very quickly when you're thrown into that environment. But I think just getting out there and kind of practicing and being around, because when my parents actually moved, there was a lot of prejudice that they encountered, that my brother and I encountered when we spoke our home language, and I think we live in, luckily, a more tolerant society these days, where people are willing to be more patient and help. You can find those folks that will help your mom speak English or befriend her.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you're going to have an answer to this question because I think we're still struggling as a society to find the answer, but Fred, when he was talking before, brought up the president's comment about how in order for legislation to pass, it needs the support of the people, and that essentially our leaders are following. But there are exceptions to that rule, and I think most notably is gun control, where 90% of the country supported some sort of reform and nothing passed. And I know there's no NRA equivalent in the immigration world, but there is fear and there are substantial opponents. So where that bill failed, how will this one succeed? sorry if that was challenging.
Well, I think, I mean, you hit it on the head with the lobbyists, right? I think there was some bipartisan support there, but you had a very, very powerful lobby, with lots of capital behind it that influence some of the vote. Here, I mean, what I really, have been encouraged by is the bipartisan nature and the willingness to work through and compromise this Gang of Eight has done, which resulted in coming out of committee yesterday. And so, I do think there are going to be challenges, but, a lot of these, you can argue the facts are indisputable on the gun control side too, but you don't have that large, machine that's opposing it in terms of money.
I was sort of not aloof. I mean, I've voted, but I wasn't certainly not a DC insider until SOPA PIPA. And when I got involved in November, it was inevitable. Everyone was telling me it's an inevitable pair of bills. And then within 4 months, it went to unthinkable. And that was in the face of 94 million. You can check this in Hollywood lobbying. And that's a pretty well entrenched lobby. Now, it makes sense because it's such a frankly geeky issue that the internet can mobilize so effectively to do it. And I was really heartened by that because it was actually like, hey, democracy in action. Like, our elected officials responding to us, their bosses. But you bring up the point of gun control, and I think you're reminded more broadly that that was the exception and not the rule. I would like to see this be another one of those exceptions where we can actually use a groundswell of popular support and all the wonderful tools we have on the internet to win the day. I think if democracy in America is going to is going to survive, it has to adapt to this new technology we have, because you can't deny the influence. I mean, I see it every day on Reddit, and then I see how much traditional media is upset about the fact they no longer have the distribution that they used to. There's a power shift in how you get a message out. Whether or not that's strong enough to break Washington from the lobbyists that are destroying it from the inside, I don't know, but it's ambitious, and that's what we all are in this industry for, right? It's to do ambitious things. So let's let this be another example of how people can win.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're actually just right out of time. And so, okay, sorry, one last question.
Thank you. Well, from the last panel, and I've also heard it here, I hear that there are states that are kind of on that borderline, and there are senators that are on that borderline. Is there a place where we can get who they are so we can start threatening them? Hello.
Or politely phoning them.
Well, what happened the other day, I wrote on the Latizen blog and pretty much said whoever is against this bill, it's considered an enemy of the Latino community. And I got 3 calls from 3 senators, and I was like, well, that's pretty cool. So, but of course they're reading, they're paying attention. Yeah, Latizen has over 10 million impressions a day, so they are paying attention, but who are they? So we can like start naming them and be strategic about it.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you have that information about any particular states that we want to politely call?
It's a moving target. I mean, until this bill came out of committee last night, people didn't have to take a public position on it. So we certainly have thoughts about where targets are and where we need to convince people and where we need to show support. But I mean, that's going to be, we need people all around the country to get up, and I can certainly advise you about where smarter places to focus efforts are.
And also, don't be afraid to also heap praise on the senators who are doing it right. So you had most recently Senator Hatch coming out of Utah saying, yeah, all right, thumbs up. I don't know if they literally give a thumbs up when they do this sort of thing. I don't know if a clue how DC works. They give them an upvote. Let them know. Let them know that they're doing it right, and they're just going to be as overwhelmed by the praise. They love that. They're politicians.
Well, I plan on digging out that information and we'll post it somewhere. So, but I think it's very important to put pressure on the folks that oppose it.
Agreed. Two very great points. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jalak and Alexis, for.
Thank you very much. Thank you very great. Before you all file out, let me just say one last thing, which is that as much as we think New York is the center of the world and certainly the center of the immigration world, this is a fight all around the country. So from here, we're going to go to Austin, Texas. We're going to go off the live stream and turn it over to you in Austin and then into San Antonio and to San Francisco. Tell the story there, tell the story around the country. And for all of you, please do go to marchforinnovation.com in March. And for now, go use the photo booth, shoot Instagram, and get active. Thank you very much.